Hello, hello. My name is Nate McCallum, and I am happy to finally introduce slash reintroduce my new book, Symbiosis of Heart and Soul, Eclipsed Edition. Yay! 1 year ago, I released Symbiosis of Heart and Soul for the world to experience and read. Symbiosis of Heart and Soul, for me, was the most authentic me book that I've ever released in my life. It detailed a year and a half of my experiences and really showcased and covered so much of my life. And to me, even to this day, I look at it as an absolute souvenir of who I was and who I was becoming at the time. Nothing I've ever done has made me more proud than releasing that book. I spent a lot of time and worked on myself a lot to make sure that that book was as beautifully written as I humanly could have made it, whilst also at the same time telling a story. I think that was the main appeal for Symbiosis when I released it. Was in the course of a year and a half, little did I know, you experience a lot, you know. I went into it with a very distraught but hopeful headspace. I had come off straight from releasing Losing Grip, which, to those of you who don't know, was a very hard poetry book to write. It was very heavy-handed and very depressing. Once you release a book like that, I went into Symbiosis with the mindset of, I am going to make a book that is optimistic, and hopefully at the end of it we tell a story of, I started in a very rocky place and we can end in a place that is much better. And fortunately, you know, it took a year and a half until I finally had that kind of click moment where it was, yeah, I think we are in the space to release it. And so I did. You know, that's not to say that Symbiosis of Heart and Soul doesn't delve into a lot of the confusion, the heartbreak, the frustration, the anger that goes along within a year and a half of experiences. But to me, you know, although those poems are essential, and I didn't want, you know, those to take away from the overall, you know, good notes and the good flavors of the book, I think they were absolutely necessary to include, because in its full, it is a story, you know, and it kind of jumps around. I think that's kind of the magic of Symbiosis, is because the more you read it, the more you'll see certain poems in different parts of the book, they all intertwine with one another. You know, again, with a year and a half of experiences, certain people, they might have at one point brought me good things. And then at some points, you know, maybe they were my frustration or my heartbreak. And so I think that's what was really interesting, because even with someone who doesn't know the absolute complexities of my life, you get to see from an unbiased perspective, you know, the love, the heartbreak, the frustration, the anger, the healing, the absolute monumental experiences, the love for my family, sometimes the frustration with my family. It's just a full scope of all the little emotions that one human can feel in a long period of time. Symbiosis, here she is, the OG Symbiosis. When I released it, it was, to me, you know, conceptually the most out there, but also at the same time the most perfect. I mean, not to be like gloating about the book, but Symbiosis to me was more than a poetry book, but like an absolute, almost like an autobiography of myself. And that's why I have such a strong attachment to this book and what it was. And, you know, it is my best-selling book of all time. So I always have that little like dink. And I'm proud. I put a lot of time in that book, and I wanted to make sure that people got to experience it or read it. And I'm happy that, you know, it was acclaimed. That leads us into Symbiosis of Heart and Soul, Eclipsed Edition. Here she is. Oh, look at her. So this is Symbiosis of Heart and Soul, Eclipsed Edition. I know a lot of people are probably wondering, Nathan, why is there a re-release of a book that's already out there? It's pretty much complete. And for me, You know, number one, I think one of my biggest goals with Symbiosis was to get it into stores. With my old publisher, it was impossible for me to achieve that dream. And I had very high hopes for that book. You know, the people who wanted to read it, they went out, they bought it, they read it. That's great. But for me, I knew that this could be something that could resonate with a lot of other people. As an author, you set expectations and goals for yourself, and I'm just a very hyper-competitive person as it is. So when I started writing and released my first book in 2018, I always wanted to maybe one day see my book in stores. So I pivoted and moved to a different publisher, and with this new publisher, they pretty much grant me full access to be able to get my book into stores. And it's a lot easier for stores and bookstores to pick it up. And that was the main motivation. I mean, also money. Money was a big one too, you know. No hate to the old publisher, but the only way that I was able to profit off anything was if people bought it from like the store. You know, with new publisher, I can now put this in stores, put it in online stores like Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Walmart, and still receive the chunk of the money that I deserve because I'm not having to pay off distributor, publisher, you know, the store that's carrying this book. So in that sense, you know, the amount of work I put into it, you know, as an author, I really didn't care about sales, but I do. I wanted more with what I was putting into it. Well, initially when I was creating Symbiosis Heart and Soul Eclipsed Edition, I really was just going to smack on a new cover, call it a day, use the new publisher, and then move on with my life. Diving back into the Symbiosis headspace, because as I'm writing Symbiosis of Heart and Soul Eclipsed Edition or finishing it up, I'm in the process of writing book number 6, which is If I Stay Silent. And the two are absolutely two polar opposites in tone. And so I thought at the time, like, it would be very like yin and yang to release Symbiosis and then If I Stay Silent in the same year, because whereas Symbiosis of Heart and Soul is a very optimistic, very hopeful book, If I Stay Silent is kind of dreary and kind of pointed in its poems. It's dark, but I call it beautifully devastating poetry. It comes off a lot cheekier. Like, I think the imagery and metaphors in Symbiosis are kind of what carries it. If I Stay Silent is kind of just that kind of, I'm kind of like just punching. I go for the jugular a lot of the times, and I'm very cheeky with the poems. It's just pretty much the concept of these things that I've held with me for so long. What's the purpose of being silent about them? You know, let me just express myself. And so Symbiosis is very much the opposite, where it's like we're reflecting and realizing and doing whatever. And so going into that headspace and mindset, you know, I wanted to really dive back into it, because when you write a book like If I Stay Silent, you need an escapism. It's the same reason why I started that book when I finished Losing Grit. And I went through all the poems that I never ended up releasing for the book. And I realized that there was a lot of really good poems that I cut out of the initial release. And so then it just became to me this incentive of, let's just make it like a complete collection. There's a lot of poems that I omitted from the original version for good reason, because they were very much poems that I felt belonged to me, not for the readers to see. However, you look back at those poems and because they were really good. And I was like, you know, it's a shame that no one gets to read these, because I think they're some of my strongest, whilst, you know, maybe sometimes antagonistic or incriminating of myself. I think it adds to the story of Symbiosis a lot. The ones that come to my head right off the bat are Without the One I Know, which I consider to be probably one of the saddest poems I've written. Maybe not to you, but to me at the time, I wrote that and I'm like, you know, it's that kind of, it's the story of you, or maybe a year out from a heartbreak, and you were trying to find love again, but it's like, and you always run back to the one that you knew. And it's like, no one else understands what you're going through, no one understands why you keep going back to that person, and you're trying to figure out, how do I make it out? in this without the person that actually knew me for every aspect of me. The other one is The Pawn, which is pretty much my most antagonistic and self-incriminating poem I've ever written. It's one that I started writing during losing grip. But I kind of put it on the back burner for a long time because that's a poem no one wants to write. It's, read the poem, you'll see, even in my healing, I was not always a great person. The Life I Choose is a very cheeky poem. It's kind of because Symbiosis is a lot of getting new things, letting go of other things. It's the final chapter for a lot and the new chapter of many. The Life I Choose is, when I wrote it when I was 22, I don't care what people say or what I do. This is the life that I choose and I'm going to live it. This is living at 18, at 22. Not much left, but it's the life I choose. And so I really like that one. I think that one was just kind of who cares what people say? I'm going to live my life how I want to live my life. And then Eclipsed. I can't go without saying Eclipsed. Eclipsed was the first poem that I wrote for the book that was supposed to be in the original release that I absolutely forgot to add. So when I released that book and saw that poem wasn't in it, I was devastated. I was like, crap, and it was too late, a little too late. And I was like, whatever, I might just put it in my next book. But, getting this new opportunity to re-release the book, I'm like, okay, put that in. And then it came to me, because you're wondering, why Eclipsed Edition? Here's the thing. The whole purpose of Symbiosis of Heart and Soul was two different things coming together and, creating a unison and rhyme with one another. It's the same thing with the eclipse. You have the sun, the moon, they come align for a short amount of time and they create something absolutely beautiful. Regardless of the story that kind of inspired the book, I think the two intertwined kind of just worked really well. The heart and soul, symbiosis, the eclipse, it's just two different things working together to heal and create something beautiful. Other than that, I don't know what else to say. This is her. Look at it. Really take a gander. It comes out, I don't know when this is going to be released, tomorrow by the time that I'm recording this. And I really do hope you pick it up. I think, it's got 25 new poems, and those 25 poems really add a lot to the book itself. It adds a different layer of story. It's kind of like introducing new characters into a story. The people who I didn't really feel like needed a spot in the book, they are now in the book. Because, a year and a half, that's still a lot of things to cover, and I think it adds a lot more depth to everything that went on in my life in a year and a half. Not only that, but a lot of the poems that were initially in Symbiosis, I have adjusted or edited. It's not to say that they're gone. I didn't delete any poems in the book. I look at this a year later, because this is a year later, and a lot of things or people, they might not have aged well, but to me, they are still time capsules of my life at the time, and still things and people and places that healed me at that time. So I'm looking more so at different poems that to me at the time seemed unfinished or kind of sloppy. And so I kind of went back, reworked them into a more cohesive, poetic light in which I can look back on and not feel like whenever I read the book back, I'm like, ugh, we've reached this one. It's the same poems, the same themes, but a lot of it has been adjusted for a more modern style of how I write now. Other than that, I'm gonna leave you with it. It's a nice day. I'm gonna enjoy it. This is exactly the weather that is, very Symbiosis of Heart and Soul coded. So yeah, go buy it. Comes out Friday, May 24th. Thank you.